Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our 2021 Recruiting Trends Conference. My name is Courtney Banks Tatum, and I have the honor of serving as the Interim Director of the Career Center at Calvin University. We are elated that you chose to join us today as we dive deep into college hiring and recruiting trends over the past year. Before we jump into the content, I would like to pray over the session, so please join me in prayer. Oh, gracious Father, we come to you with our hearts filled with appreciation and gratitude for who you are and the opportunity to be able to gather today virtually. May you bestow your guidance and blessings on this conference so that we can enjoy and appreciate its significance in our lives. I pray that you guide the words that are spoken and allow every attendee to obtain information that will help them make a bigger impact in their spheres of influence. Amen. All right, so here's a quick overview for today. I'll start by providing an overview of Calvin University and share a few key highlights from the Career Center. Then we will hear from Dr. Phil Gardner for the keynote presentation, and we will end with a moderated Q&A session. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to drop them in the chat comment section as we have Career Center staff monitoring the chat and compiling questions for the Q&A portion. I also want to give a special thanks to our sponsors, Hello West Michigan and MCEA. You'll hear from both of those representatives today. We have Rachel, the executive director, moderating the Q&A session and providing a gift to a special lucky attendee for today. So thank you, Rachel, for doing that. And MCEA will talk a little bit at the end about their organization. So let's jump right into it. So some quick facts about Calvin. We are a world-class Christian university located in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Our mission is to equip students to think deeply, act justly, and to live wholeheartedly as Christ's agents of renewal in the world. We are a liberal arts institution that serves more than 3,200 students, and they hail from 47 U.S. states, 49 countries, and 4 Canadian provinces. We have over 100 majors, and our top undergraduate programs are listed on the slide. Since 2020, Calvin has added 6 new in-person or online graduate programs, with several more to begin between now and fall 2022. Now, in terms of Calvin Career Center, as I'm sure many of you can attest to, the pandemic has dramatically shifted the way that we do our work in the Career Center. Last year was our first time coordinating virtual career fairs and programs, and we found them to be quite successful with employers and students. However, there were some employers and students that preferred the in-person contact. So we decided to take a hybrid approach this semester and offer virtual and in-person programming. We held 2 in-person career fairs and this semester, which enabled us to serve 80 employers, as well as connect them with more than 280 students. In addition to career fairs, we offer an array of options for employers to engage and connect with students, whether it's in person or virtually. Another program that we are very proud of is Calvin Life Work, which is a 4-year co-curricular program that prepares students for life and work after they graduate by providing training in personal finance, vocation, leadership, and career readiness. As of today, we have over 1,000 students participating in our programs. So this is just a snapshot of where Calvin stands during the pandemic and how we have shifted the way we do our work to meet the needs of employers and students. So I know you guys are really excited, just like I am. So I'm going to transition into introducing Dr. Phil Gardner because he's going to go really dive deep into this content. And I'm really excited. He'll be presenting for the next hour. Then we'll move into the Q&A portion. So I'll read his bio for you guys. Phil Gardner is the director of the Collegiate Employment Research Institute at Michigan State University. Dr. Gardner has been with MSU for more than 30 years after receiving degrees from Whitman College, which is a BA in chemistry, and Michigan State University, where he has a PhD in resource and development, economics, and public policy. His major areas of research include the transition from college to work, early socialization and career progression in the workplace, workforce readiness, and other areas related to college student studies. MSU's nationally recognized annual college labor market study is done under his direction each fall. He also served as the senior editor of the Journal of Cooperative Education and Internships, and in 2019, he was inducted into the NACE Academy of Fellows for his advancement of knowledge, leadership, and excellence in his profession. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Phil Gardner.
Welcome. Thank you very much, Courtney, for that introduction. I'm really glad to be here today with everyone. Thank you for taking the time to come and share with me what you're encountering as you engage in talent management and talent development. I do want to take this time to extend my appreciation to Calvin and Hello West Michigan too, for their support, not only of recruiting trends, but of the Institute. I've had a working relationship with Calvin for over 20 years, and I value it deeply. Now, to get started, there are resources available to you. The main report is available for download at the CIRI, the Institute home site, and you can see the link there. Just type in ceri.msu.edu and you'll come to the home page, and it'll give a brief introduction to recruiting trends this year, and it'll show you how to access the report. The presentation is being recorded and will be shared with all attendees and those that had anticipated coming but had a conflict and couldn't come. And then after December 4th, Courtney's team can make sure it's open to anybody. And as Courtney introduced, we'll have some questions at the end. So I'm going to proceed and talk a little bit about what we found here this year. It's a very good year. It's an exciting year, and I think we'll get to the point where we'll hear from employers that they're really having a lot of challenges finding the talent they need right now. One of the things that stood out in this report, and I'm going to start with this because it weaves its way all the way through it, is the rapid adoption of digital platforms, digital AI-assisted technologies in the recruiting process. Almost 85% of the employers that responded to this said they were using in some form at some steps in their recruiting process technologies that could be from virtual interviewing to AI-assisted bots that talk about the company and profile positions, talk with students about opportunities. There's a wide range of things that are going on. I point this out because about 3 years ago, so right before the pandemic broke, we had 2 years in trends, we had talked to employers heavily about their adoption of these technologies, what they thought about them. Based on our projections, we felt that between 2025 and 2030, about 50% of employers may be beginning to use and have incorporated these technologies. The pandemic sent everybody into the deep end, and everybody's trying to figure these out. We're going to talk a little bit later more about this. We know that people often don't resonate with these. They're tired of these. But the fact is, they're now part of the environment. They do shape recruiting and how employers engage. It doesn't mean that we're going to go back, not see face-to-face, in-person contacts. That's too critical to the whole talent management process. But we're going to just see it in different ways at different times. And it's going to require different behaviors and mindsets of everybody engaged. So to get there, first, I want to talk a little bit about who's responding. This was a difficult year. The responses were lower than I had hoped. It does affect how I present the information. I still had over 700 provide total hiring information, but I did have the normal amount retire the survey and complete everything else but that. So it was well over 1,300, which is down a little bit. What's really noticeable about this sample is that 50% of them indicated that they now recruited nationally. So I asked them where they recruit, and are they regional employers, which just confined to a region, a small area, or are they recruit nationally? And this number more than doubled. And mainly the employers were saying, with the digital technologies and the resources we now have, we can now look for students and talent almost anywhere. There are no geographical restrictions placed on us. Many of them did say that, yes, we'll continue to focus in the regions that we have facilities, offices, and relationships, but we are now recruiting much broader, and so that's going to affect how resources are allocated in recruiting and what employers choose to participate in. There's a lower representation than usual from large companies, mostly in failing to provide hiring information. This comment will come up again. There seems to still be a lot of hesitancy to say exactly how many they're going to hire, though these folks are very enthusiastic about the labor market this year. I had all sectors in, several sectors, however, too small to provide separate information. And 90% of the employers indicated that they recruited at public and private non-for-profit institutions, and 38% said they recruited Black and Hispanic serving institutions. This is a slight nudge up. I was interested in this because last year during the height of the pandemic and the attention on diversity, which is certainly, it was renewed and given a big emphasis last year, but it's been a big part of recruiting for the last decade for sure. But a lot of employers said they didn't know much about these types of institutions. They were going to expand their recruiting at these institutions. We saw a little nudge up, not as much as you might have expected. Most employers are telling us that they are still working on how they're going to unfold their diversity plans and how they're engaged. There's a lot of employers that are already there, but many employers are just doing this and trying to grapple with this for the first time. One of the big comments, I had a close friend who, on the employer side, who called me about the week before I finished the report. He was late in getting his survey in, and he has filled out the survey for many, many years. And he said, really, the biggest problem I have and my colleagues have is all the virtual clutter that now comes with this whole digital, virtual type of recruiting. We've got more emails, we've got videos, we've got events to attend, so we're on Zoom all the time, and we just don't see the emails. I put it aside, but many of my friends have just probably filtered your email out, not intentionally. They're just overwhelmed with the clutter, and we asked that in the survey too, and a lot of employers talked about that. They're just overwhelmed, and that did affect the responses, and I appreciate the employers that reached out and said, geez, I wish we could have participated. I just am overwhelmed. Okay, so just to give a context, we have a number of things going on in the economy. They affect us all differently. Some of these directly affect the labor market. Others could potentially shape the labor market more so than others. I just want to point out a few of them just to give you a context of the pressures on the economy and what employers are facing. The first one, everybody's talking about it. It's on our minds. It's inflation. It's gone up during the pandemic, mainly because of the huge supply chain problems we've encountered. Most of us in Michigan are quite well aware of what's happened to the auto industry and the problem with chips, but the chip problem is everywhere. But there's issues in the supply chain. The folks at Michigan State in supply chain had a panel not long ago, and they figured it was going to take 4 to 6 months more to get the supply chain straightened out. But I saw a more recent report that says it may linger longer. I mean, auto industry is anticipating another full year of having delays in getting their parts they need. And the pandemic is still influencing the supply chain. For example, Toyota which has not has had as many problems with chips, had to close down its electrical harness plants in Malaysia because of the high incidence of COVID in the facility. It delayed production for at least a month, and so they had to, cut down production of automobiles by 40% worldwide. That's significant, and that's still happening. The problem is that the longer it goes, it builds in more and more inflation and becomes to get ingrained. What's now happening in partnership with inflation is you and I, as individuals, have shifted our consumption more to physical goods than we did during the pandemic. When the pandemic, we didn't do as much. We rationed. We didn't buy as many things. We were careful about that. And now we've shifted the demand side significantly to want more things. We're in anticipation of the holidays and things like that. And so that puts price pressure on the supplier side because there's just not as much to get out. And so we're seeing some inflation being built into the process. It's going to have implications for wages and other things. Remote work is a big topic. Everybody's talking about it. Everybody thinks it's going to happen. We're all going to be working remote. There was, for those that are into statistics, this is a great case of confirmation bias, because a lot of the stories that, as we worked through the pandemic for the last year and a year and a half, has been of all the stories of people working remotely and how it's going to just transform the labor market. And yes, there's companies like Cisco and others that have done remote work for a long time. It's embedded in their culture, and it's widespread. Others are just trying it. But what we found is it's not going to be as extensive as we anticipated. We're going to see it in certain industries, of course, more than others, but we're going to see a hybrid approach. We're going to see people coming into the office several days a week and being able to work remotely with their teams the other remainder of the week. There's a necessity for this. There's a lot of socialization, creativity, a lot of interactions that are so valuable that take place face-to-face, just like in recruiting, that need to be sustained and nurtured. And so having your total workplace remote is probably not going to work for most organizations. The other big problem in remote work is the trust of managers about their employees that are working remote. The studies that have most recently come out have indicated that employers don't trust about a third of their workforce that are working remote to be as productive as if they were in the office. Productivity is there is a lot of productivity gains from remote work. Commute time has been cut out. So actually employees can work longer, and they have. The average workday is increased for most remote workers by almost an hour. There is, of course, certainly more Zoom meetings that take part in that too. There's the big movement, and I think the pressure that most employers are feeling right now is this whole attitude of among the workforce that it's time to, employer, take this job and shove it. The quit rate is really high. Now, if you're not familiar with the quit rate, what that is they look at total separations. We look at total separations from an organization, and they're divided into different groups. There's retirements, and then there's involuntary separations. That means the company let somebody go, they fired them. And then there's voluntary separations, or what they call the quit. And the quit rate usually is moderate at any given time, but in July, it soared to 70% of those that separated from an organization voluntarily quit, looking for a better job, looking for something that interests them. And that set an all-time record until August, when it went even higher. So there's a lot of movement by people's feet in looking for this. In the age group of 40s, those that were 40 or during the progression, over 60% of them, I believe it was 60%, indicated that they're willing to change occupations and they're really considering what they're doing and what they want to do. And so the pandemic has brought this a period of time when people are reflecting. Obviously, we have some issues in certain sectors on wages and other things that employees are looking for, and they're just walking. We've seen a number of groups that have been severely impacted by the pandemic. Healthcare, frontline healthcare workers, frontline service workers that have to deal with the public, whether it's bus drivers or trash collectors or people that are forced to work because of what they do, and they come in contact with other people that may then transmit the disease. And they took a big hit. But the biggest group that's been impacted is women. Nearly 5 million women initially left the workplace on the onset of the pandemic, mainly to take care of children, and they have not come back significantly into the workplace. They're still out there, but they with long as the situation faces that their kids don't have yet vaccine, they're very careful. They have to the daycare don't have any employees, so they're not opening as quickly. Women have had a struggle to get back. They want to work more remotely, probably than any other group. Again, depending on their employers, they become hesitant to bring back people that want to work remote. So they're getting double whammied. That reports out that women in research universities have fallen behind their male counterparts because they've had to take more time out or away, or they're not as visible. Another example that just came out is during the last year, men captured more than 60% of MBA positions because women were not able to act on them due to the situations that they had a balance between home and career. Another big whammy that came out, this was a Harvard study that came out in the Wall Street Journal, and I've checked it several times to make sure that it's correct, but it is. Black households in their 30s, okay, and they have and they're all have at least one college degree. Their household income has plummeted as adjusted against inflation over the last 25 years. It's been really, it's more than problematic now. And the main reason, or one of the main causes, is the fact that Black households carry twice the level of college debt as white students, and it's really impacting their income. Okay, the last big issue that's come up, and we're now going to face this, is the gender gap in college. It was prevalent before, more so at graduation than at entry, meaning that men tended to not, it was harder to retain men than women. But right now we see a huge gap and more women attending four-year institutions than men. Men right now have some confusion and doubt about identifying with education and the need for education. It's not just walking away. Several studies have just come out quickly examining what's going on with young men, and most of them are adrift. Most of them are kind of lost, and they're not sure what road to take post high school. Should they commit to college when they're not sure that it's going to be financially a viable option for them, or should they go to some other option and they're kind of lost? All this contributes to a huge labor shortage. Some other people have coined it as a living wage shortage, a healthcare shortage, childcare shortage, but there's a lot of factors now that are contributing to this labor shortage that employers are dealing with. I was with a very prominent employer. Many of you, I won't say his name because but he's known to many of you in the field, and I asked what his situation was, and he said, you know, you used to talk about the talent pipeline and where people come into the pipeline and where they leave the pipeline. Well, right now I'm facing a massive sieve. As fast as I pour them in, they're going out. And so we have this just huge talent development, talent retention problem, and many employers face that. So that, in a nutshell, is kind of what everybody's facing. Now, I'm going to talk about a number of things that employers talk about, and where I framed this was I was fortunate to be invited to a number of conversations in April, May, and June when I was working on this survey about employers as they wrapped up a very difficult recruiting season, and they were talking about the future. They were talking about the reactions, and these were small focus groups, and I listened to those and I kind of framed out what they were talking about, and then I introduced those same kind of concepts in this survey to see how extensive employers held these ideas, or was it just ranting and raving by a few that just had a particularly bad situation. So the first kind of question is, how are they going to approach recruiting moving into the future? You've now got these technologically enhanced systems that can allow you to do a number of things without having to go to campus, and yet there's a great desire to then be back face to face with students. And there was so as the recruiting teams organized and the event options, out of those discussions there was 4 prominent pathways that employers were considering using, and some of these employers obviously are considering multiple pathways, and that's what you're going to see, a lot of multiple pathways. So one of those are events with selected campuses. I'm going to go to my core campuses. I'm going to either do it virtually or I'm going to do it on campus, but we're going to maintain those relationships. We're going to get back to doing our hands-on engagement with employers, and there's about 38% of these employers said that they were going to engage that way. It happened to be a mix of large employers that already have established brands, although they're going to take a deviation on that in just a moment. But a lot of regional employers that have quick access to campus, it's convenient to them. That's basically where their talent comes from. And they're going to sustain those relationships, kind of like what Courtney talked about earlier when she introduced it. What we're doing here at Calvin is a hybrid approach. The other approach is events managed by our organization with multiple schools. This is largely major brand companies now. Instead of going to a number of schools, they are going to either have a host institution host them, or they're going to host their own event and invite a select number of schools. Now, giving an example of this, because this is one where I do know that it's happening, is a major company will go to the Research Triangle area in North Carolina and hold one event for NC State, Chapel Hill, Duke, Wake Forest, and Elon students, and they will invite them to their one event, and they're the only employer. They're hosting it. They may have it hosted on a campus. This will all be virtual. This will not be in person. And that's a way that a lot of them are doing that. The most prevalent way is going to be engaged in combined events with multiple schools and multiple employers. A lot of it is virtual, but the employers believe that these still are productive. If there's any concern here, it's when you get into these kind of events, you could have attendance issues, which is problematic sometimes. But this is one you're going to see. These are events that are being orchestrated by third parties. Handshake has provided access to a range of employers to a range of schools that they usually normally wouldn't see. So these kind of events will happen in our region. The Higher Big Ten Plus does this. It was, I would say, modestly successful early on, but I think it's going to receive much more attention moving forward. Then there's the third part. I think you're going to see fewer employers do this yet. at this time until technologies really improve, but they're hosting their own events. They are going to go out and identify students through various means, through the like handshake, and they're going to invite students who are interested to submit things, and then they're going to invite them to their own event, in-house event. It'll be an in-house career fair. They'll meet professionals at the organization, and from those initial contacts, they will then identify the people that they want to contact. Underlying all this is once those virtual contacts are made and those connections are made, then we're going to see this hybrid mix of in-person, hand-hand, because they will eventually have to be where they meet and they get to know each other, and it's going to be a personal relationship. It's just going to take place at different times and in different places and in different ways than we're used to. Now, virtual recruiting was a big issue last year. Most parents started dabble with it, or didn't dabble with it, they just had to do it. And so now we came back and asked them to identify their advantages and disadvantages. There are two clear advantages to virtual types of arrangements. Merely 60% said it's more efficient and effective use of organizations' personnel. And the second reason is we incur a huge cost savings for not having to send people out overnight, per diem, travel expenses, big fees to attend events. Then the next big benefit drops off that they're seeing, at least a third of them say that they see a diverse pool. When we talk about disadvantages, obviously and clearly, the one we all talk about is in-person connections. They're vital. We live on that. We breathe on that. We think it's really important. But the biggest two thorns in the side is inconsistent student attendance and the fact that there's still a high incident of no-shows. We get no-shows in person to person too, but they're problematic when the arrangement's been made between the employer and the student. The student doesn't manage that appointment and make that appointment. That's a problem. The technologies are also a problem. They still fail to provide the environments that employers are looking for. I know from a couple of groups I participate in that there are a number of really prominent technology companies that are doing a lot of work in trying to prove these technologies. Some of you may have seen the fact that, again, Harvard came out with a study on applicant tracking systems. They are underperforming, and employers are missing a lot of talent, mainly because the way the algorithms are set up, typical in AI, when you have algorithms that are made by one group that don't take into account other groups. And so we're seeing a flux point here on technology, and as these begin to emerge, because they make sense to employers, we're going to see this. We'll probably see more adoption of technology. I'm going to say this here, and it's going to repeat itself. All of us want to be back in person. We want that. Career centers need it because it's a lifeline for them. But the bottom line is the decisions to be made are going to be made by CFOs and COOs, and they're going to look at the better utilization of personnel. They don't have to pull out line staff to go to career fairs. They can keep doing their work, but come out for an hour and a half, and participate in an online fair. They don't need as many staff for new recruiting. It's very costly for experienced hires, and there's such a need for that they'll shift their resources there. And if they see a cost savings. So it doesn't matter, as much as we want to, there's just not going to be a huge move back towards a complete on-site, hand-to-hand recruiting process. Now, one of the things that came up, an interesting question was posed: does the virtual process require more virtual interviews to get to an offer than it does in person? The answer is no. It came out that it's about the same, okay? and it came out that the mean is about 7 and the median's 5. So the median says that 50% of companies take 1 to 5 interviews to make a higher offer, and then for the other 50%, it takes 6 or more. We found no statistical difference by size, but we did find some interesting caveats by industry sector. Those sectors that do 5 or 6 interviews tend to be in health, education, nonprofits, oil and gas. Those that take 8 or 9 are professional business scientific services, which is a huge sector. It's everything from public accounting to veterinary medicine, with advertising, public relations, engineering services. Almost all your computer science is in there, and computer service in there. There's architecture, there's logistics, and all the senior management functions. A lot of stuff in there. And then the ones that require the most are finance and insurance and manufacturing. What's interesting is it's the latter two groups that many campuses see their representatives on campus more and get the impression that it takes a lot of interviews to get an offer, when in fact, it probably takes fewer. Anyway, we're now going to move on to some actual numbers, because this is what you've been waiting for. It's really kind of exciting. This is the overview since we came out of the recession in 2010-11. We started to encounter some really aggressive, really serious, robust labor markets where there was just so much going on and employers were just aggressive, particularly since the 2014-15 year. Then in 2020, that's when halfway through the year, the pandemic broke. You see that little squiggly line there. We don't know exactly how much it impacted the total college labor market. It depended on location. It depended on when the virus reached your location. So Michigan, for example, and New York, New Jersey got hit really early, really hard. And so their current recruiting had to stop and adjustments had to be made. And so they may have pulled back more. Other parts of the country didn't have to stop right away. Recruiting continued in some form, and employers would make higher. The numbers dropped. It wasn't a precipitous drop. It wasn't a collapse in the labor market. Last year, if you remember, I reported just a balance. It was a wait and see. It was hold. We'll hire what we need. We're not going to drop significantly. The difference down was minor. It was no significant difference and no change. But what the big problem there was, employers just were removed from recruiting totally. And so those that were engaged were just holding the line. Okay, so going into this year, what's the situation? Well, we see only a couple small percentage are not going to hire. We saw preliminary hiring goals were up. That means that they have been given preliminary numbers. It could be more, but they've been given preliminary targets to go out and get and find those people. The companies that soared, the number of companies that had definite hiring targets, one of the highest percentages we've seen. That means that they have definite numbers. What's interesting about this group, they wouldn't tell me what those numbers were. A lot of companies had excuses, but they said they had definite numbers. The numbers to be decided, we're out there actively recruiting, we're on campus, we're out there looking for kids, is down significantly, but it's still 25%. Then we have a group that's creeping up slowly over the years. It's made a big impact, and that's now others. And basically what they're saying is just in time. We're now going completely just in time. Our recruiting can't be defined by the academic terms that colleges and universities are. And with the advent of online degrees and online learning, where a talent can be more flexible, they have more opportunities to continue in school and not be physically on campus. We can hire those people. We'll ensure that they finish their degree, but we can get them in a part-time role to start with and make those adjustments. But we need them now, and that's how a lot of employers are beginning to look at this environment. And that's why you're going to see more interest in credentials and programs. You're going to see more attention on online options where students can hybrid their degree and move into, at their senior year, move into hybrid courses, except for central project course or something that they have to be on campus so that they can then go to work. And you're going to see employers meld together their internship that they have this summer before their senior year right into work and encourage them to go online, and that they will guarantee that they'll finish their degree. The labor market enthusiasm is high. I mean, I haven't seen these kind of numbers. 66% say it's very good to excellent overall. 77% says it's very good to excellent in their industry sector. 44% are at the hiring, increasing at the bachelor's level. Only 28% are decreasing, and the decreasing is very slight. So we see a lot of action there. Okay, these are the numbers. I want you to go to the report. There's cut out in so many different ways. But I want you to look at the top. You'll see that big red word, adjusted. When I get smaller samples, and you'll see there's 717 unique employers that provided entire information. That's a good number if this is as far as I want to go. But what happens when you have these kind of numbers, a few responses can kind of trigger some disruption in the mean and provide some statistical problems. And there was a small group of very large employers that were being very aggressive that distorted the mean quite significantly. So I had to take out the top 1.5% of employers to stabilize the mean. In other words, my standard deviation then fell with the mean, and at least it was acceptable. Otherwise, it would be hugely out of line. Now, we're not going to lose these people. They're going to come back in, and I'll comment on them because they are a surging source of employment. But overall, the market looks really good. You look down the right-hand column as you're looking at this, the percentage changes are all up. The associates looks good. The numbers of employers seeking associates was down. That had more to do with some of the schools that I had counted on to help me at that level were not able to help. But you'll see the bachelor's is up a solid 15%, and as is the MBA and the master's. Now, if I were to give you the numbers with the big employers in there, that 1.5%, you would have seen associates go slightly higher. You would have seen the bachelor's surge to almost 25%, and you would have seen a decline in interest in MBAs and master's students. Now, that's because a lot of employers, the large employers, are looking exclusively almost right now at the bachelor's market. So having said that, if you've usually attended my presentations, I go into a lot of description on what's going on in different sizes and in sectors. And this time, everybody's pulling in the same direction. I didn't find a lot of deviation from this. That's why, unfortunately, I can't do regional reports because they get broken down so quickly that the numbers really don't mean much. But at the associate and bachelor's level, everybody, regardless of size, is pushing in the same direction. And as I briefly mentioned, MBAs are down a bit, are down at the upper levels. That's larger mid-size, and the large companies are de-emphasizing MBAs, de-emphasizing masters. A lot of it is masters in business degrees. Some of it is trying to shake out as, for example, in a couple of health hospitals said, we're trying to regroup after this, and we wish we'd get rid of, COVID because we're just, our talent is so disrupted right at the moment. Anyway, I don't see a lot of, everybody's pulling in the right direction here, big, small, we see a lot of activity. The sectors, despite the supply chain issues, inflationary problems, and unrest among employees, we see all sectors are moving in the right direction. I have to put a big asterisk here too, because some of the sectors are too small. I still know that the hospitality accommodation section, which is restaurants and lodging, is still disrupted. Airlines is still disrupted, though they're hiring significant numbers. A lot of companies are working through the vaccination policies, and as they're coming through down to the deadlines. They're having to release some people that refuse to get the vaccine. So, a lot of companies are still working through this. However, every sector that did report was looking good. Manufacturing looked good. The auto industry actually looked better than I thought, given the chip problem. That doesn't mean the auto industry doesn't have some huge issues in sustaining their workforce. And competition among line jobs across the country is fierce. But the big ones that recruit on campus: manufacturing, business, professional science, finance, and accounting is way up, and those are robust. Others that are ag and ag support systems is doing right well. Retail is modest, big shift from a lot of attention on e-commerce back to more general trade. Wholesale was holding its own. Transportation, as long as ground transportation and logistics was soaring. Airlines was kind of still subdued. They hadn't really kicked in their numbers yet. Nonprofits was good, but not as robust as it's been in the past. But everybody was in play, and that was good. The more worrying sides, read the report, was a wide variation in the MBA and Masters. It's a lot of that's contributed, when I get to this breakdown, by some rather small sampling sizes. One of the questions that comes up is and what do we see? What salary wage pressure out there? But we really saw a strong movement to increase starting salary offers this year. If you looked at the 10-year history and go back and look at those reports, you see that most there was always 30%, 40%. Maybe the year before the pandemic, we got to maybe just almost 50% of employers raising salaries. Well, right now, on average, 53% of organizations said they're going to increase starting salary offers. And we looked at this by the majors that they indicated that they were electing to look at. And so we looked at those disciplines. We looked at those companies that said that they were going to raise salaries 54% or more, and what majors they predominantly looking for, and they were accounting, communication, social science, health science, construction, and agriculture. Then we looked at those that are about the mean, 50% to 53%, and that was all majors. They were looking for anybody: computer science, IT, data analytics, and the natural and biological science. Then we looked at the companies where most of them were 50% or less. Wasn't going to be dropping salaries, but they weren't raising salaries. They were just going to keep them the same. Basically, business, engineering, arts, and humanities. Anyway, so we're seeing that not a lot of talk about commissions, but I'm sure that's in there. But this is just basic salary offers. The other big question is what's going to happen with talent management. If there was any big adjustment last year in what happened in the whole recruiting type talent management thing, was just so many employers had to pull back and not host interns, co-ops, any other form of student that was that needed professional training. The market kind of picked up unexpectedly as more employers got used to virtual environments, and we saw some pickup in the fall of bringing in students virtually. So most students last year into this summer probably had to be in a virtual situation with regards to their internships, co-ops. So what's going to happen moving forward? Well, most everybody's coming off the bench. There's still about 11% that aren't sure that they can even hire interns yet. They're still in environments, industries where they're having a difficulty with the pandemic. They're still hesitant to bring their interns and co-ops back. 46 to plan the same, 36% the numbers are going to be up. So we got robust numbers there, and the smaller numbers decrease, and only 3% are going to plan to pursue other options. They weren't clear on what those were. I'm starting to figure that out. The biggest change, though, comes on the other side, and that's what employers are going to do with regards to how those work assignments are going to be handled, how they're going to host them. 46, nearly 50% said they're going to be on site. 28% there said they're going to be a hybrid approach. We're going to have them come in and onboard, socialize, get familiar with their team, and then put them in a remote assignment, a remote virtual assignment, and then bring them back at the end. Or we're going to split in half and have those that can work remotely, and those that need to be on site will be on site. Some are still waiting. They're in environments where they still have to wait to be what they're going to be. They're committed to virtual because they needed to set those up. But if it's possible that they can move to on-site host, they will, leaving only 5% that will virtually host. That does not mean that we're going to see virtual internships disappear. They're going to become very niche. They're going to be nuanced. They're going to be used to leverage their pipeline. But we're not going to see a lot of companies retain the virtual internship as the primary way that they're going to begin to develop talent. They're going to go back and in-house, face-to-face, and then as they bring them on as full-time employees, they will then be able to work remotely. So now we come to some issues, and this latter part of the talk, I'm going to talk about some of the things employers shared with us, and then we ask other employers to confirm, so that I wasn't just hearing an anecdotal story that was an employer told us, and it was catchy and it made sense, and could have been funny, it could have been sad, but how extensive was that? So one of the big issues, of course, this whole past year is what one employer called performing in the box. I wish I had thought this up. This is kind of cool. But that's that Zoom box. It's a box. It looks like a box. And how a student does in that box really dictates what's going to happen. And there were some issues that they brought up. And I provided all the employers opportunity, and there was 5 that stood out. And when you look at these are also some of the same issues that they're going to have face-to-face anyway. Number one is that they're inflexible about their expectations to job requirements, salary, location, things. This is essential in this uncertain environment as companies are going through reorganizing their workplace, adapting to this virus and what's going to happen afterwards, that things are in flux, and students have to be flexible about this. And we're going to see this again in a minute. But their inflexibility, they're just so fixated on what they think is going to be there, and they just don't have enough understanding of the workplace. Coming not prepared for the interview or the event. Some of them don't like online, and so they're gonna they dismiss it. I'll go through it. They're not enthusiastic. They don't come prepared. They haven't done their homework. You'll see this again. Not interested in the opportunities the organization has to offer. They sign up the organization because it's a name brand. They really haven't particularly looked at the jobs that were posted or the positions that were available, and then they get there and they don't really get connected to what the opportunities are. They need to be open-minded. This goes with number 1. The career pathways that you may have anticipated when you were a freshman or sophomore no longer exist. We've got multiple new pathways emerging in our organization and how to get to the job. So one of the requirements was you need to get in the workplace, get a job, and see how these pathways unfold to get where you want to go. And then another big one is awareness of your digital presence, what your background looked like, what you look like coming across in the box. I mean, there was a lot of grace given to students when we moved quickly to this. They knew that they were in apartments with multiple people. As the things went along, having your roommates play beer pong in the background is probably not a good idea. Looking constantly at your phone to see if somebody's texting you is not probably a good idea. But you've got to think of your presence, okay? Now, assisting students. Now, this is a thing that employers understand that they'd like to see students better prepared for any type of recruiting event. A lot of it has to do with virtual environments. It breaks down into behaviors and attitudes as well as some very practical functional things. These are more directed towards career services and career centers finding ways to guide students. The number one thing is they want students to bring the same level of enthusiasm to virtual recruiting as they bring to in-person recruiting. Don't dismiss the virtual setting as a second-rate, second-tier experience. It's not. Always test the functionality of your video conferencing app in advance, something that I didn't do last week that caused me a huge problem. 92% said candidates need to express ways how they're adaptable. It says a lot about their expectations of how they've adapted to COVID, how they've adapted to the recruiting process, how they've changed their mindset about college recruiting, having to deal with it in a different way than they expected. Have they been able to adapt to it? If they haven't adapted to it, what's the hang up? Comes back again, remain receptive to flexible job requirements. Okay, assist students, and we'll talk about more directly, assist students with understanding this is a time to think about multiple ways to think about job requirements. Career services need to provide guidance on conducting solid research on the characteristics of the jobs, gets right back to the one we just talked about, what you want, what you're willing to look at, have a good sense of what the salary ranges are, locations, and some of the other things, so you can actually understand what the employer has to offer and why they need to be flexible. Students need to practice and hone their critical communication skills. Communication skills are important in every environment. In the virtual environment, they have less time to make their point. They have only a few 3 or 4 sentences. They may only have seconds. So they need to be able to work well in this environment. Interesting, they said you need to be more assertive and creative in virtual environments than you might necessarily be in person. In-person allows you to bring out more of your personality in different ways that you might not come across through the box. But here you have an opportunity to think about that and how you can look different. Then they drop off a little bit. Only 45% said students need to expect to interact with AI-driven tools. This is different question than virtual career fairs and virtual interviewing. This is human AI technologies that act as humans, chat boxes, introductions to organizations, a lot of AI-driven tools. Drop down to 45%, but that's really high given that these are just being introduced, these kind of techniques. So people are jumping on these. We're also seeing in the career service spaces, we see more AI-driven career counseling going on. Okay, and I asked when I didn't buy this when a couple employers talked about it. Given all the concern about virtual clutter, should a student be proactive and reach out to an employer that they're interested in and ask to make a connection? Can I have a virtual conversation with you? And when I put it up to people, 60% said yes. Have students be more proactive. They need to take ownership of their recruiting process now. It's not a function of career centers to do that. It's the student responsibility, which leads into something else we're going to talk about. These are their impressions post-COVID. What's going to happen after we're through and we finally get through this? Here's some of the things they said. Students need to accept the responsibility to self-manage their opportunities in the recruiting process. It's now a student responsibility to manage themselves, to manage their connections, to manage the time. We'll see that again. And be prepared because it's up to you. The middleman's essentially going to be gone. The career service folks are going to do some critical things, but it's now between the employer and the arrangements between the employer and the student. The student needs to be more proactive, engaging the employer. Employers will then open opportunities for students, but students then need to manage them, manage the times. Career professionals need to assist in mastering this new digital recruiting environment. It's not going away. They have to they've got to shift the student mindset accept it as part of a broader way of recruiting. Career professionals also need to be more intentional in communicating how students hone and master their digital presence. Okay? Of course, we're going to be dealing now with more visual clutter. It's going to be a challenge of how we separate out what's virtually important and what's moderately important, what's less important. I just hope that recruiting trends, when it's handled in the future, doesn't get less important. Students need more time management skills. They need to understand that if they make these commitments on time and they are no-show, it can be a death spiral for them. And then employers did recognize, at least a lot of them, that there are now more opportunities than ever for students. It's going to be a much more competitive environment for talent. Students have a wide number of employers to go to if they open up their career path mindset, if they understand and do their research on what they want. They're going to see a lot more opportunities rather than going the old tried and true way. Retaining new hires, this was a question that came up. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. I'll let you read about this. So I have time for question and answers. We did ask, given the advice that employers were giving last year that followed up on career service professionals were giving, parents were giving, just get a job. The pathways are changing. COVID's blocked some pathways. Get in those pathways. We felt that there was going to be a retention issue. I phrased this question, I thought we were going to get through the COVID, and then the Delta variant just surged again this summer, so it kind of made part of this question mute. But we did ask them, how long do you think you're going to retain these young people that you're hiring during this COVID period, given the fact that most of them were counseled, get in, get a job, and then move? It's inconclusive, but what we see at the bachelor's level is they expect these new hires that they've been making to last 3 or 4 years with the organization, though the modes are 2, 3, and 5. For advanced degrees, 5 years. The longest expected tenure is in educational service, agriculture, construction, and utilities, and the shortest is in entertainment, accommodations, and hospitality, leasing, nonprofits, retail, transportation, health services, and everybody else is kind of squeezed in there. In between. So I'm not sure how this compares. I haven't pulled out numbers to compare before the pandemic. I think you're going to see a lot of movement going on here as things open up. But I think new hires also have to get used to the work environment. They have to understand how it works. Just to make a move quickly after you get in is not necessarily your best benefit. Having said that, then, I'd like to go to this slide. This is my homepage for the Institute. On this homepage, you'll find the link to the document. You can get there by going to ceri.msu.edu. There you see along the top, you see the 4 connections about us: recruiting trends, events, publications, and archives. The ones that you need to be really working on are interested in moving forward is recruiting trends. That site contains all the recruiting trends from the very beginning, except for the very first one, which was 1 page, and I haven't been able to find it. They're all there. You can have access to any of the reports that were made over the 51 years of the recruiting trends. It looks something like this. You'll go to this in the archives. It explains recruiting trends. There's some history and other things like that, but they're all listed there. Then there are other 2 buttons were publications and archives. The publications is what's currently being done by the Institute. This highlights the book that came out in 2020, my book that came out in 2010 about talent development. And the T model, I have a book coming out this spring on transfer students and career success. And then it also lists all the publications that are in journals and publications outside the Institute. These are mostly scholarly journals. We've had a number published since in the pandemic. We've got a number in review. So this is one way to see more of our current things. And I encourage you to look at that. I said, We've had 3 articles accepted in the book, and we've got 6 articles under review. And so they're going to be linked here to the sources so you can see them. Then the other button is the archive button. This contains everything that the Institute has done, almost everything since 1985. The recruiting trend link, archive link does work here. They were fixing the other link, excuse me. And then you can see the categories that they're going to be sorted under. This is ongoing process. The person that's doing this guarantees me that this should be done by the end of November. A lot of stuff is already there. These are the kind of the topics. They are also going to put a topic line in there, the most requested, the most viewed things, so you can find what you're looking for. I will tell you most of my work is under the internships, co-ops, probably, and young professionals, and things that do with the transition into the workplace. Okay, the reason I point these out is I am stepping away. This is my last recruiting trends. I've done it. I'm going to be 75 here shortly, and I'm going to hang up the recruiting trends part of it. It takes a lot out to do this. Michigan State hasn't decided what it's going to do yet. I know that the Executive Director of Career Services really wants to keep it. We're working at ways. But with the new administration and the loss of historical record, it may get lost. I will certainly be there to help and mentor, but I am not going to take on. It's been a great 25 years of doing this. It's also been a great 35 years with running the Institute. I can't tell everybody that's listening about how much I deeply appreciate everything that you have done and contributed to the Institute and to me through your support, through your conversations, through your queries and probing and raising questions that led to research questions, that led to dialogues, that you allow, and the freedom you allow me to provoke you and to ask you to think about things differently, that the world will eventually change. And just because we developed a cool thing in the 50s and 60s that's carried on for all these years, things are going to change. And you've been really receptive to that. And the friendships I've gained, the relationships with institutions that have sustained me, I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. Thus, it's important that our records stay, and that's why the archives are important. You won't want to go there very often, but there's a lot of work out there that you can look to, you can refer to see a benchmark for maybe some of the things you might be thinking about. But with that, I'm going to turn it over now to, I think it's Courtney and Rachel.
Thank you, Dr. Gardner. As always, you provided great information for us to digest and to ponder as we continue making strides in our college recruiting, employment, and training efforts. Now, due to time, I want to make sure we have a good time for Q&A. So I'm going to transition to that portion of the conference. Please feel free to add your questions in the chat at this time. So let me introduce our Q&A moderator. Rachel Gray is the Executive Director of Hello West Michigan, which is a talent attraction and retention organization that promotes West Michigan. The organization, which helps member companies increase their rate of success in recruiting top talent, was the first organization of its kind in the country. Rachel has been with the organization for 8 years and started as the program manager. Prior to that, she worked for Career and Counseling Services at Aquinas College and interned at Celebration Cinema. In 2018, Rachel was honored as a Grand Rapids Business Journal 40 Under 40 recipient. So please join me in welcoming Rachel Gray.
Thank you very much, Courtney. Very excited to be here. I know as long as I've been at Hello West Michigan, I've been attending Recruiting Trends with Dr. Gardner. So thank you for your service to really our industry. You know, for recruiting, this is such important information. So glad to be here on the last one with you. A little bit about Hello West Michigan before we get to the question and answer. As Courtney mentioned, we are the talent attraction and retention organization for West Michigan. So we are all about promoting West Michigan as a great place to live and work. And then we work very closely with employers like you that are watching on how we can support and enhance what you are already doing and the talent that you are bringing here to West Michigan. We have an exciting program coming up, which I want to make sure that all of you know about, even if you're not going to participate as a company. Our Rethink West Michigan event is our annual event that happens around the Thanksgiving holiday here in West Michigan. It is all about bringing people back to the West Michigan area. And this year it's happening virtually on November 10th. So that is happening next week. So coming up here quick. If your company is interested in participating and recruiting professional candidates from outside of Michigan, we do still have spots available. So please reach out to me. I'll make sure that my email ends up in the chat so you can see it. You can also reach out through hellowestmichigan.com. But we do still have spaces for companies to participate. And my one request for all of you is that even if your company doesn't participate, is to tell someone about Rethink West Michigan. Everyone knows someone that they'd like to see come back to Michigan, and this is their opportunity, is to register for this event. For candidates, it's free to register. We encourage them to pre-register. This is really all about welcoming people back to West Michigan. So if we can all do that collectively together, that's how our region is going to grow and how our economy is going to grow. So with that, I want to make sure that we get to our question and answer. And I want you all to kind of warm yourselves up in the chat. So I want to hear from you, particularly how your recruiting strategy has changed this past year. One of the shifts that was really intriguing to me from Dr. Gardner's report was the shift in not just looking regionally at candidates, but looking more broadly nationally. And so I'm really curious for our companies, are they recruiting, with a kind of from a broader base? So everyone go ahead, warm up the chat, put that information in there. We kind of want to see where you're recruiting from. And then, Dr. Gardner, one of the first questions that kind of struck me as I was looking at this and thinking about, the record quit rate, and then this, kind of great outlook for hiring. Are companies hiring because people are quitting a lot? Is that why they're hiring? Or are they filling new positions because of actual growth?
Well, I think it's a combination of both this year. I mean, I don't think we would have counted on quit rates being that high in a normal year and a normal cycle. We've got two things going on. We've got this normal buildup of need for new talent because of retirements still going on. I mean, we're at the height now of the boomers retiring. So we're right in the middle of the boomer group. And so they're still leaving in significant numbers. And so regardless, employers were going to have to find replacements for those. Now you add on all the turmoil going on up and down an organization's talent from top to bottom. There's a lot of movement going on. Now you add that. A lot of that, they'll try to find experienced hires, but some of it they're going to have to find. It's going to be easier and probably less expensive to find new college talent to fill some of those positions. They won't, depending on what they are. So that just adds more, gives more push to the market. The third factor is that a lot of companies sat out last year. They had to wait. They didn't hire, and they sat on the sidelines or they reduced hiring. Well, their need hasn't gone away, and all of a sudden they've got to push not only through, they have to catch up. So we got catch up, we have just normal replacements of retirees, and then we have the chaos that's being added by companies that are having to fill people that they didn't anticipate moving.
It seems like from your report and even, what I'm hearing anecdotally from employers is that there are a lot of different issues depending on kind of, either what life situation you're in, what you're facing at home, maybe what industry you're in. You highlighted a couple of industries that were, of course, just hit really hard by COVID, not in that they didn't have clients anymore, but industries where they have to interface with the public, which then suddenly is, that's no longer a very attractive field because of what's going on. And so I would imagine that with all of those different issues, because there's such, a diverse group of issues, that there really is no one silver bullet for, fixing the talent shortage. I think that's what employers always want us to, to highlight, to say, well, just give me one thing to focus on. But the reality is that it's not. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. I think COVID has been terrible and it shouldn't be, but it's just one of those black swan events that just kind of pulls every possible problem that was in the labor market. Livable wage is not a new thing. We talk about it. Not having health care, and particularly for frontline workers, for people that have to deal and they get hit hard and they don't have a lot of health care coverage, child care. And we see, and these problems have all been there, but COVID just blew the lid off of everything all at once. And now, and we seem to be resistant, at least in the political policy realm, of trying to solve any of those. So it's going to be up to regionals and employers to get together, and they're going to have to solve these issues. We just can't go any further because the labor market, the talent, we're going to go through a period where there's going to be just less people available to work. I mean, we're going to go through this period where we have less young people coming in unless we get more of them that were right now getting lost because of COVID. And mostly of them are first generation low income students that have potential. If we lose those, that's going to just make the talent deficit even larger.
I heard someone describe it as, kind of in reference to the demographic drought, that every single potential employee is now important, right? We can't let anyone kind of fall through the cracks. And to your point, there's no longer people falling through the cracks. It's a sieve that is draining the talent from our companies.
Correct. I think, more so than ever, I think talent everybody has talents, and we've got to nurture those. I mean, everybody. We've got to find, and I think that's why you're going to see companies open more and more different ways to find ways to become employed in that company. They're not going to just rely on 4-year degrees and 2-year degrees. They're going to rely on credentials. They're going to rely on certifications. Then they're going to, try to encourage these people. It's a learning process. The number one characteristic in the workforce, I don't think any employer will say it's not. I mean, they may preference something over, is you've got to be willing to learn, constantly upgrade your skills, constantly move, whether you have a degree or not, whether you come in this organization through a credential, through a specialized certificate that gets you a kind of task that we need performed. Once you get there, you've got to then continue to grow. And so talent at every level becomes critical. And as an employer wants to dismiss talent, isn't going to embrace every talent, they're going to walk. They're learning to walk. We don't have the unions like we used to that did the walking for a lot of people, but now this pandemic has given people the courage to walk with their feet.
One of the things that kind of jumped out at me and in my eyes was a little bit in contrast with what you were just saying there, was that most employers expect new hires made during COVID to stay 3 to 5 years. I thought that was kind of hopeful, that was a long time to be expecting hires to stay, especially when you kind of couple that with, the fact that students who came out during the pandemic, they were advised to take whatever you got, even if it's not a perfect fit, coupled with the fact that the quit rate is very high. I was just really surprised at that expected 3 to 5 year tenure.
Well, yeah, because, we do hear, at least anecdotally, about young people that are moving quite quickly. But when you know about the socialization process and what it takes to learn how to work in an organization, that takes some time. It's not something that can be done automatically. You can learn a task rather quickly. So if there's a task that somebody learns, they can learn that in weeks and months. And so if that's all they're worried about is the task, they can move really quickly. But how the organization works, the socialization, building teams, understanding how your expertise works in, knowing what you need to get to the next step, that takes a couple years to figure that out. And if you start moving way too fast, you're never going to get that grounded experience to figure out how the workplace works to your advantage, you're just going to start jumping. So I was optimistic at 3 to 4 years, because not from the employer standpoint. I think from the employer standpoint, they'd like to get 5 to 7 years. Really, that would be ideal. 3 to 4 years at least gives young people, or any worker, the chance to understand how the organization works, how they work in an organization. Most young people coming directly out of college, whether it's 4-year, 2-year, some with even these certificates, they've never really worked in the kind of workplace they're going to be in, have to learn how to work, and it takes time. So I guess I looked at it a little bit different. I thought that I'm hopeful that they do stay 3 or 4 years, just so they get a better grounding and then move. My employer colleagues say, well, we'd really like to get them 5 to 7. But what happens is, I suspect, is these new hires are going to get in. They're going to see other people beginning to move. They're going to say, why not I move too? And so they may be doing some premature moving. That's just my thought on that.
So a question from the audience here, and this one is kind of flipping us a little bit. It says, do you see other organizations moving to a more Amazon-like model where they expect employees to not be long-term? It's just at Amazon, that's the expectation, is that they're not going to stay a while. Do you think that other organizations will move in that direction?
Yeah, true. I mean, a lot of us don't work in short term. I don't think that would work for a lot of I think Amazon and what its model is and what it does is kind of unique in that way. I just don't see others jumping that way. I just don't see a lot of working that way. I mean, when I was was more active at Michigan State and set up was behind the scenes working to set up the way the career service is. My whole intention was we get these young professionals and they wouldn't stay very long. It was a very flat organization. We didn't have a lot of pathways to move up, that they would be in 3 to 5 years, and then they would move to another campus to get a higher position. That hasn't happened. Most of them stayed in place. We've had not as much movement as I thought. So I think what happens is you can go in with that idea that we're going to create work opportunities that have very short expiration dates on them and expect people to move. But I think people in many organizations will get in and stay there. I don't know. I just don't think it's going to be something that we're going to see a lot of other companies model. I don't think most companies aren't set up to just deal with that level of turnover. But when you hire 11 out of every 150 people in the U.S., I guess you can do whatever you want.
I read that stat in your report. I read the report cover to cover in preparation for this, and that was kind of a scary stat to think about. 11 out of 158 work at Amazon.
Yeah.
All right, so this is shifting gears a little bit. Another question from the audience here. With the quit rate being so high, what are your recommendations on retaining your associates who are seeing these other jobs with high sign-on bonuses and high salaries, especially if you're a company that can't increase base wages?
Well, then I would quickly find out, wages isn't the only thing that keeps somebody there. So if you're seeing some of your longer term people wages moving because you haven't been able to increase wages as quickly, and so they want to take advantage of the wages, but your young people coming in, what else do they want? What kind of environment do they want? What else can you provide them? Some of it is, what can you do in the way of providing access to childcare? Certainly it's going to be healthcare is big, but it's the kind of camaraderie in the workplace. It's the kind of, we've talked about this before, but in a more calm environment. They like to be socially engaged. They like to be community engaged. But not everybody that comes in wants those things. So I think as part of the onboarding socialization project, employers need to take some of their own advice. They're going to have to do more research on their new hires, on the kind of things that they expect, those things that are going to get them excited, and begin to introduce those. Because if they're excited about the work and how they're valued, not beyond monetary terms, they're going to probably lengthen their stay here. But if it's all the only thing that's they got to hang on to is monetary, then they'll probably just ride the wave and jump if they can. So, I mean, there are a lot of industries, particularly, I have to say this, women tend to get in lower income because they want to be in social justice, they want to be in community action, they want a lot more of that, and they tend to be low wages anyway. So in those cases, you're probably, their interest is doing good, building programs, getting engaged in, whether it's diversity and family and things like that, and getting young kids in a better position. And then they're only they'll do that, and then they'll move on to another organization, different project. Probably you're going to have to take your rewards there, and the fact that you gave these people the creative environment to do something meaningful, and not only to them but to the community, and celebrate that and let them move on.
Thank you. Another question from the audience, and this is specific to an audience member who works in healthcare. It said, are there specific factors that may be keeping college students and college graduates out of the workforce at this time? Applicants for this audience member are at an all-time low, but factors such as healthcare coverage and childcare are not typical issues for this age group. When you think about a recent college grad, those types of things may be, kind of lower on the priority list just because of their age demographic. So do you think there are other factors that are keeping them out, or, again, I think the caveat to this question is that the audience member is in the healthcare industry, which is obviously at the center of this storm.
Yeah, the center of the storm, but I mean, I have to say that I haven't got a lot of feedback either way from the healthcare on the student side. It depends on what positions you're hiring for. You can only put, as more students express interest in healthcare related fields, they still got to get through some rather demanding curriculum to get there. We haven't greatly increased the number of nurses coming out. It's very costly to train a nurse, for example. So these programs haven't expanded widely. We see more creation of hospitals going back and creating their own nursing programs. But it takes time for those kids to move through the process. So when it gets on the technical healthcare side, I mean, the interest among students is still there. It's just that they got to get through those programs, and that demand hasn't changed. If it's auxiliary services, so it's people to work in finance and administration and things, I don't know what's keeping them. I think probably what we're seeing is, again, a confirmation bias kind of thing, where we distorted the healthcare field so much during this pandemic, and that's what young people have seen and said, oh, I don't know if I want to see these people die every day. I don't want to know if, I don't want to have to face that situation. So they're hesitant to get into it. That could be part of the problem. They don't see the total healthcare field. They don't see all the other opportunities. And so they're just, probably reacting to a limited mindset. That's what young people do. They don't have a lot of inputs. That's why it's important for health services folks and recruiters to work more with the career service and their contacts in the faculties to reach out to students saying, no, we've got a lot of opportunities. It's not going to be a life or death situation with COVID. We've got it under control. We know what's better and how to handle it. The vaccines are here. We now have some potentially drugs that are going to come, people that have it, that's going to minimize. So we're going to see a big shift here. So you should not be worried about that. I think that's probably what they're facing, is just, the pounding the stories since COVID and the health being first line workers. And they're probably just hesitant and scary to go into that. I don't know. I don't have a better answer for that.
Well, thank you, Dr. Gardner. I could keep asking questions all day, but we are at time. So thank you very much for this presentation. And again, congratulations on such a fantastic run with the Institute and bringing us this valuable information. With that, I will turn it back over to Courtney.
Thanks, Rachel. So once again, thanks everyone for attending. Thank you so much, Dr. Gardner and Rachel, for presenting. I want to do a special thanks to our sponsors, NCEA, and then also Hello West Michigan. There will be a recording of the session provided when we send out the survey at the end. So give me a day or two to get the survey out and also the recording. Once again, thank you so much for attending. We look to partner with you in the future.